Next presenter is Thomas Pirosh. He is a technical instructor, course developer, web developer extraordinaire, and today he is going to be talking to you about how you take our existing set of rich JavaScript and Java APIs and extend them to meet your particular development environment needs. And if you watch closely during his presentation, you'll find clues that he's some kind of big AC Roma fan. And so I would invite any Liverpool fans to seek him out tonight at the party and have a drink, because I'm sure that would go really, really well. But good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, no Liverpool fans, please. So I'm here to talk to you about how to extend the MarkLogic client APIs. And before we get to the discussion, let's actually discuss what the client APIs are. So today there are two client APIs that you can use in MarkLogic. So we have a Java client API that is geared towards Java developers, so for people working on Java applications. And we also have a Node.js API, which is for Node.js developers working on some JavaScript projects. Now the good thing about these client APIs is the fact that you don't really need to worry about how you connect to the MarkLogic database. We give you all the functions and methods that you need, and also functions and methods to not only to connect to the database, but also manage your documents, do inserts, do updates, and also how to query and search for documents. So all the networking, all the exception handlings are built into the client APIs. And these client APIs under the hood use some HTTP communication to talk to the MarkLogic database. So when you actually create an extension, you also get to use the same exception handling. The HTTP communication is already there for you. So you really don't need to worry about how to implement these details. So these resource service extensions that you can create can be written in either xQuery or server-side JavaScript. So it's really up to you whether you want to use xQuery or use JavaScript inside the database as well. And once you create that extension using the programming language of your choice, you can then store that in a modules database inside MarkLogic. And how you store that is really up to you. You can also use the Node.js client API to store the code that you've written, or use any of the document management functions to store that in the database. And then once you have that code inside the modules database, from within your application, you can then execute HTTP GET, PUT, POST, or DELETE methods to access your custom code. So let me demonstrate that as part of an example. So here we are going to assume that you have a team of developers who are working on a fantasy football application. And just to set the scene and make sure everyone's on the same page, when I say football, I mean football and not the other thing, okay? Just to clarify. I still have time to discuss that with you if you want, but maybe after this talk. So, on a more serious note, we do have a database where you have information about some teams, okay? So some JSON documents that tell you information about the football team, the name, and the value of the team. Then you also have some documents that are about football players. So they have a name, they have a position, and they also have a team ID. So from this you can see that there's a relation between the actual team and the player. So what if your application developers want to have an endpoint where they want to say, okay, I want to pass in a parameter, the name of the team, and I want to return all the players who play for that given team. So they don't want to do any sort of, processing of the data at the application level. They want this to happen at the database level. And that is exactly how you can use these client APIs. So you get to define a function for an HTTP GET, POST, PUT, or DELETE method. You write that, as I said, either in JavaScript or in xQuery. And because you are in JavaScript or xQuery world, you can use all the properties of that function. So you can declare your variables, you can use arrays and objects as well. And you can also process the parameters that you send in from your Node.js application. So in our case, that's going to be the name of the team. And once you have your extension in the database, you can then access that from the Node.js application. So the example that I have here, and this is really just the skeleton code, and this is what you need to get started. So in our case, we want to pass in a parameter for the team, and we want to serve that as an HTTP GET request, and we want to return the names of the players. So I create a function called GET. I have two arguments for that, context and parameters, and because I'm working in JavaScript, I also have to make sure that I export this GET function. If I were to create a POST function as well, for example, I would have to export that as well inside my code. Then I also want to make sure that I capture the parameters. So this params argument, which is the second argument for my function, can store the parameter that will come from the application. And as I said, because I'm in JavaScript world, I can write all sorts of other JavaScripty things in here. In a nutshell, what this code is doing, it looks up the ID for the team, and then it looks for all the players who have that team ID, and then it returns an array that contains the names for the players. Then the Node.js developers, so these are the people who are working at the application layer, who are creating the application itself, can now use the db.resources namespace. And this namespace has multiple methods on it. So we have the get method, the post, the put, and the delete method. And the good thing about the DB resources namespace, all the functions that we give you, is that they work just like any other function that we give you with the client API. So they all return a promise. You can then handle the response. And again, what I'm doing here is just very simply, I log out the response that comes back from the database. And of course, what's missing from here are two things. So I have to specify the name of my extension, which I just named show players. So this is the name of the extension that I have persisted in the modules database, the server-side JavaScript code that you saw on the previous slide. And then I also send in the parameter. And this is the parameter called team. If I change that, then of course my server-side JavaScript code is going to return to me a different list of players. So once I execute this code, and I admit there's some other pieces of code that's missing from the slide, like the things, how to connect the database, etc. But once you execute that, all you get is the list of the names of the players that come back from the database. So as a summary, we allow you to extend the client APIs because we want to give you the opportunity to create some custom extensions, your custom functionality inside MarkLogic, and you get to control what that functionality is. And then we allow you to create methods that cover the HTTP GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE requests. These extensions can be then consumed from either the Node.js code that you just saw on my slide, or also from the Java Client API. And the most important benefit is that now, if you think about this, you have developers who work at the application layer. They are creating your Node.js application. They really don't need to worry about what's happening in the database, right? So that is completely transparent to them. The database developers have to be responsible on how they return that data. This also means that the data is not being transported to the application layer, and there's no processing of the data there. The data that gets received by the application is what the developers have requested. And thank you very much.
One quick question. Your example was based on JavaScript. If I'm a Java developer, what are the differences, or are there any additional challenges in extending?
So there are no additional challenges. If you are a Java developer, then we have Java-specific functions for you that allow you to specify the parameter and how you want to process that parameter. And we actually have a documentation page on that, on the client API, that has a whole section on how you can create, how you can use these extensions in Java.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.